Welcome, everybody. We've kind of gotten an introduction already, but today's chat is a little bit about something that, depending on how long you've been in the crypto industry in this space, has been a little bit of an unsolved problem, or there's been maybe limited kind of progress, at least to the naked eye. And that's sort of this digital identity or decentralized digital identity. And I guess the point of today's conversation with my lovely experts here is to kind of set the table stakes, define kind of where we need to go, and a little bit what's kind of stopping this adoption of a digital identity. And so I open up this first question to everyone on the panel, and we'll start with you here, Albert, is a digital identity has kind of been identified as something very, very important, at least insofar as we should be trying to get away from Google login for everything we use, right? And I'd love to know why exactly we shouldn't be using, I use it every day. I use it for tons of different apps, different games. Why shouldn't we be using Google login for everything we do, and why should we be looking for a different solution?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for that one. I think Google gives us access to accounts, but we don't own our credentials and our data on Google.
Yeah, okay, that's a good answer. Patricia?
Thank you for having me today. So for me, Google is easy. That's why. It's easy, it's straightforward.
Yeah.
So there's no kind of complication behind it. And I think almost everyone nowadays uses it.
Yeah. Thomas?
I could speak about this for about 30 minutes, so I'll try to keep my answer concise.
Yeah, try not to speak that long, that'd be great.
I mean, this is this paradigm of centralized and decentralized, so we can say simply it's a centralized solution. There's the convenience aspect, it's easy to use, but I think it's about a priority trade-off between something that's interoperable, easy to use, and sort of putting privacy and control above that. So I would say it might be something you want to use if privacy and control is not your paramount priority. But for us at the Cardano Foundation, at Viridian, it is. So it's not something that we would recommend using and explore an alternative.
Yeah. Robby?
And I think maybe, first of all, I agree with everything that's been said. I think to add on that, it's unfair to just pick on Google, because actually I would bucket all Web2, big social media, et cetera, platforms together. I mean, they're all equally guilty of essentially having business models that rely on advertising monetization of our data. And so I think that's the fundamental flaw of the design of those systems. They're brilliant for convenience, but they're only actually brilliant for convenience once you have already surrendered all your personal data. When you think of like one-click payment, it's only because you filled out all that data a long time ago and you forgot that you went through that onboarding headache a decade ago, and they've had your data ever since. So I think now that we have the ability to have Web3 tools that can be privacy respecting and preserving using zero-knowledge proofs and things like that, we have this opportunity to take back control of our own data and think about how we live in a world where we can actually be the arbiters of deciding how our data is used.
Mm-hmm. And this idea of taking back our data and sort of the price of convenience, it'd be nice if we could maybe put some kind of dollar figure or the addressable market here. Like, how much money are we talking about if we can kind of solve this problem that, from my perspective, doesn't seem like it necessarily wants to be solved? I think users continue to use a lot of these Web2 services, and they seem to be okay with every 5 to 7 years some kind of data breach, some kind of phishing scam as a result of that data breach. Is there any way we can kind of talk about like money saved, money gained by making this transition away from more a centralized sort of service? I know, Thomas, maybe you had a couple ideas on this as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's definitely money to be saved, and I would also say that those data breaches aren't 5 to 7 years; they're almost 5 to 7 days, if not 5 to 7 hours. And 80% of those breaches are due to the identity being compromised. So we can solve that problem by leveraging a decentralized identity system that has a bit more root of trust anchored in the control of the users or maybe a regulated authority. But maybe I can step it a bit further beyond money, because you can't really put a monetary value on a human life. And there's an element here that we don't speak about necessarily about interacting online, and that's children. That's minors. We live in an environment now where we don't have privacy. That's just a reality. But we can make decisions on technology that can build a future for our children and our children's children, where they can actually have that privacy. And these predatory environments that exist in the gaming world and the social media world, these only happen because children don't know they're not talking to other children. And the extortion, and I presented last month in Utah at the State-Endorsed Digital Identity Summit, and I followed a woman who spoke about her son who took his life, doing exactly this, interacting on a mainstream social platform, thinking he was speaking with another young woman, and turned out to not be the case. And what they do is they get you to migrate from that larger platform into something like a Telegram messaging system. And then they go through an extortion exercise that ultimately ends in blackmail. So there's a lot of money to be saved. There's a lot of potential revenue opportunities, and maybe we can talk about business models. But I think there's a bigger picture here beyond money as well, and that's the human life. That's that realm that doesn't get enough attention, I would say, that it deserves.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And Bobby, to your point, and kind of riffing off that a little bit, because
Yes.
I know at Animoca Brands, and you guys have been big in the gaming industry for a long time, so I'm sure you have a lot to say about sort of preserving identity, that prevents this kind of tragic situations that can happen, and how a digital identity could potentially, stop that.
Sure. Well, I think also there are a couple of things. One is I think the existence of technology like zero-knowledge proofs provides us with a little bit of a magic bullet solution here, because it allows us to actually enable a world where people can both have privacy but also be able to validate themselves to certain parameters. So, for example, if I need to validate that you're above the age of 18, I can do that, but I don't need to, have a government-issued ID from you and learn your birthday and where you live and who your parents are, and all this information I don't need, because really I just want to know if you're over 18. That's my criteria. But I think when it comes to builders in the space, we also have to look at not just the harms, but what are the positives? Web3 has given us this incredible opportunity to have interoperability for the first time between lots of disparate platforms, because we all tokenize. And if you think about it, the ultimate sort of linchpin of interoperability is actually the individual. Because if I have all my data, I can bring it everywhere I go, right? I can show up at every website, at every shop, and there is everything about me that you would ever want to know. Whereas at the moment, it's flipped in reverse. We have things like GDPR, which prevent data sharing between companies, which is fine. They shouldn't share that data. But it also means that me as a consumer, I don't benefit from the fact that, Bayern Munich and Nike should both know that I'm a football fan, right? And that makes sense. But they can't talk to each other. But if I show up with my own data every time I go to those places, that's actually better for those businesses and for me as a consumer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really nice point. And I'd like to also kind of touch on the sort of, tech stack or sort of design, because we know that there are a lot of different ways that people have tried to solve or kind of create a new way of introducing digital identity, right? I mean, we're all very familiar with WorldCoin and Sam Altman's project there, and it solves a certain kind of problem, but there's also a lot of symptomatic issues that where this project shows up, you have kind of gray markets that emerge and that sort of thing. And I'd just love to hear maybe from each of you as well, like, what are the different ways that one could implement a digital identity, and sort of what does that look like for you, and how does that help maybe a user? And Patricia, I know you're big on kind of helping out your users.
We use a lot of Google, right? And it is, as Thomas was saying, it's quite centralized. And I do agree completely at 100% that we could go with the ID. But the problem is that the ID is still not very known. The problem is that there are several systems, several DID systems. Having it centralized, it's not good, because as also Robby was saying, we are not owning our own data. We are renting a platform that owns our data. With the IDs, we will then actually own our data. So that's the way to move forward. How we do it, I honestly do not know. But if we should be doing it? Yes, we should. What's the roadmap to get there? Well, I think that first we have to get people to know what it is, the IDs, how to get there, what are the blockers, how we can move those blockers, how is Google actually not helping us moving forward, how we can, how is the ID going to be able to allow us to move forward and to own our own data? and then do, as Robby was saying, that when I'm a fan of Manchester United, I can go and advertise myself for a Nike or an Adidas, wherever.
Yeah, that's a good point. Anything to add to that, Albert?
Yeah, at the moment it feels a little bit like surveillance, because Google is giving us access, but they are owning our data. So they are verifying us, they are tracing us, and they are monetizing our information. And that's a little bit a kind of surveillance. So yeah, I have this governmental background, so from this point of view, absolutely.
Well, that's a good point that you bring up. This kind of this interact, because digital identities or identities in general can't really exist if there's not sort of rules in place, or what can actually be done from a technical perspective. Also relies a lot on kind of where you stand with the government. And I know every government's obviously a little bit different, but maybe you can shed a little bit of light on sort of the conversations you're having with sort of your public counterparties in the way of implementing a new digital identity design.
Yeah, we are more in the field of cybersecurity, and when it comes to digital identities, every like we are putting on social media, every comment we are uploading, or every video we are sharing is shaping our digital identity. And this information we are sharing is used against us from a criminal perspective as well as from an institutional or governmental perspective, because they are studying us, they are studying our information, and they are using this information against us, and at some point they will attack us.
Yeah. I saw Bobby raised your hand a little bit earlier, perhaps the points missed.
Well, I was just thinking that there's a great phrase that I heard a couple of years ago that always sticks in my head, which is, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I feel like decentralized ID is the same kind of thing. One of the things I feel very strongly about being from the Web3 community is that we shouldn't be trying to build one decentralized ID system, right? Because we're not all centralized, advocates, if you think about it that way. I think lots of different systems can coexist, but I think the important thing is that we decide as a community that these are all token-based systems, because then at least we're speaking the same language, right? And it doesn't matter whether you have WorldCoin tokens or Mochaverse tokens or Cardano, Midnight tokens. We're all giving decentralized identities that interoperate in a system, and it facilitates that interoperability and actually makes the system work for people. Because the reason Google ID and these other things work so well is because of the network effects of their installed base being large enough that you can actually get value from that identity system. And so I think actually having these multiple identities is not necessarily a bad thing, and we can think about the identities also having different levels. So for example, you could have an identity that is for your wallet that has value. You can have an identity that has an email address associated with it. Or you can have one that is fully KYC'd with a government ID. And each of these levels will entitle you to certain levels of access for things based on how much data you've chosen to share, right? But it doesn't, I think we should avoid trying to set the criteria to be like too perfectionist, because then it will hold back implementation.
If I could add on top of that, I agree with everything that my colleague has said here. I think there's a caveat here in those different degrees of systems. So your initial question came back to governments and conversations that are occurring at that level. And if we think about government ID systems, and we are building systems today, there are some characteristics that must be considered, and that's this future-proofing element. So if your system isn't designed to handle a quantum event, you're doing a disservice to your citizens and to your users. That's why Veridian has a quantum-resistant strategy in it off the shelf today. Also, this notion we spoke about in the beginning about data breaches and cybersecurity. IBM's report last year said that it takes 258 days for an organization on average to identify a breach and rectify it. A lot of damage can happen in 258 days, and the reason this occurs is because there is no detection system. There is no key compromise detection that gives you this awareness that malicious activities are potentially happening with a specific identifier. So that ability to identify compromise, recover from it, and also have this quantum strategy, I think, are something that must be considered when that degree of system is something like a government ID. If it's something that's leveraged for a loyalty program or a small amount of crypto or tokens, then, there are risks that maybe are worth trading off. But further to your point, our position is, at Viridian, is your identity should live off-chain. And there are integrations on-chain that make sense, whether this is a DeFi integration or stablecoin. We recently had an announcement. We've partnered with Chainlink and their automated compliance engine. And their interest in us was exactly that we have this ability to maintain an off-chain identity, but integrate it ubiquitously across chains. So this agnostic principle is also extremely important. It's very difficult to say that, I can make a decision today that my identity will live in this specific network for the foreseeable future. It's much more realistic to say that I have made a technology decision that gives me this crypto agility or this flexibility to be agnostic across decisions in the future, but still maintain that identity.
And we all seem to be quite familiar with blockchain and Web3 and tokens, but is there a decentralized solution that exists that is kind of to the side of those technologies? Can you have, Web 2 is maybe not the right word, Web 2.5, some sort of non-blockchain, non-crypto-based, decentralized identity solution? Like, is that possible? Why do we need to go down the crypto rabbit hole?
So this is, sorry.
Go ahead.
If I may, this is exactly what we've built with Viridian. So you have 3 levels or roots of trust. You have a primary root of trust that sits in the mobile phone where the keys sit and where all the signing activities take place. You have a secondary root of trust that exists in cloud infrastructure that gives you this interoperability or this ease of use. And then you have a tertiary root of trust, which we have anchored on the Cardano blockchain. And this gives you this flexibility, and it gives you this 2.5 approach, so to speak. And one of our main drivers was to bring enterprise adoption to Web3, or more specifically to Cardano. We went out and we spoke to our users, and their demands were, we cannot make a decision to just use one specific ledger or network for the foreseeable future. If you can provide us all of these valuable attributes that blockchain offers, if you can give us a decentralized identity solution, and we prioritize protocols over platforms, so there is no vendor lock-in, then we would go forward with that decision because we have this flexibility in the future. And at the end of the day, investments have been made already on technology. So Viridian also has these backward compatibility features that allow you to have interoperability with existing standards. So we've already done an interoperability project with MDocs, the mobile driver's license, that allows you to uplift your security profile by leveraging the protocol that I'm talking about as Key Event Receipt Infrastructure, also known as KERI, and the verifiable credential format, authentic chain data containers, which is this flexible data container that allows you to embed existing credentials. So there is something that is there, and it is growing in standardization bodies and growing in adoption. But it addresses some of these concerns that you speak about.
Yeah, because I think sometimes what we maybe miss in this conversation is we're maybe 2 or maybe 3 degrees above the user here. User just wants to play games, gamble, whatever, what have you, right? Like a user just wants to go and do this. They want to live their life. They don't want to be on their phone thinking about, I've got 27 IDs here. Which of these should I use for, going to the, get my driver's license renewed? Which should I use for, betting on the New York Yankees to win the World Series, et cetera, et cetera. So I would love to know just sort of, when you go to your respective users, how are you having these conversations, and maybe where are the bottlenecks for them in terms of, like, do they even care about any of this? Patricia?
The thing is about seeing the direct benefit. If they see where the benefit is, if they see that it's not complicated, if they see what the availability is, I do fully agree with what Robby was saying about having a personal DID, a social DID, a professional DID, but the thing is that the user itself, they need to understand how easy will this be for me to use it? How easy will it be easy for me to access it? How can I use it? Where can I use it? How will I distinguish one from the other one? That's what we have to push forward and make them understand what's the benefit of having all of this and decentralize it. Coming out a little bit of Google.
Well, yeah, so we talk a little bit about sort of, the pitfalls of this kind of, what are the unlocks here that, maybe we talk a little bit about, you get maybe paid or you receive some kind of, financial reward for controlling your data and it's no longer going to these large companies. But, are there new business models that kind of arise in these new arrangements? And to what extent do those business models maybe empower a user more than maybe a centralized company?
I think maybe one, just to speak about, we work a lot in what I would call the lightweight ID space, meaning consumer loyalty and retention. We think a lot about that kind of stuff. And I think for me, one of the big unlocks is, again, this idea of interoperability, because for most people, I don't know about you, but I probably have a dozen different loyalty cards or accounts for airlines and shops and hotel chains, you name it. Everybody wants to have a direct relationship with their customers so that they can know more about them and also so they can treat them better. And if we start to take more agency, have the ability to take more agency over our own data, then we can help facilitate those interactions. That's actually how our own loyalty program, the Mochaverse network, began as the idea, because actually, we wanted a screening tool. We wanted to know if we were going to give airdrops to users for new projects, are they going to be good users? Are they just airdrop farmers and they're going to dump our tokens? Or are they going to really engage with the product and use it and stuff? So how do we learn more about them? So we created an ID system, and that was 3 years ago. And obviously it's evolved since then, but we think the same kind of logic actually applies across all of e-commerce, essentially, which is, it's in the interest of every business and consumer, if there's a desired relationship there, to share with each other. When I show up at the hotel, I want them to know I've stayed 100 nights at their chain because I want the red carpet rolled out for me. So it's in my interest to share that information with them. And they want to know exactly who I am, just so they can give me the free glass of champagne or whatever it is that keeps me coming back. So I think it's actually in everybody's interest.
Yeah.
And this is actually, I would say you guys are a rare breed in the sense that you have these ethics built into your policies and you have the values, but there's a reality here about data correlation and aggregation, and there is a huge market about taking our data and selling it. Yeah. And the reason one might want multiple identifiers is because we are aware of this data correlation and this data collection. Our positioning to solve this is if the verification process is decentralized, then there is no central honeypot.
Yep.
There is no central area where this data correlation can occur. And one of the unique things that's happening in the state of Utah is they've just passed new law that says if you are verifying digital identity of our citizens, you are not allowed to aggregate and sell it. So what it unlocks, yes, it unlocks this potential of a safe environment where our children are interacting with other children, and we know this to be the case. But also, there's an element here behind incentives. Big tech companies are not going to change the way they play unless there is law that comes into place that mandates it. This is a lesson that's being learned in the state of Utah, and many states in America are also watching this. But we've seen this happen now with adult sites and adult content. There are these requirements for age verification, but I think we need to look at this at the other side of the spectrum as well, around children. That's where our biggest risks are. But this data correlation, this data aggregation is a huge problem, and these are the incentives for the market here, and that's why our data is so valuable. So you get the red carpet treatment, but they're also making a lot of money on the back end of your data, and we have no control over that. So to my colleagues' points, if that data stays with us and we can selectively disclose, then we take that away, but it's the law that has to come into play here and actually make our rights be protected, and the tech companies service us based on our rights and not the other way around.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. And I think we've kind of arrived at this idea that there's no sort of silver bullet that's going to solve all these issues. We're basically moving from one sort of design space to another. And a question I'd like to pose to you, Albert, is sort of, let's say we find this new solution, we leave Google in the dust, there's no honeypot, there's no centralized aggregation of our identity. Is there a possibility that we're maybe overlooking some maybe new security threats that could arrive in this kind of new dimension of kind of how we manage our digital identity, something that perhaps is overlooked? Any thoughts on that? I'm asking you to predict the future, please.
Yeah, that's very good. I think from the user's perspective at the moment, it's feeling more like managing your credentials, and the Web 2, I think, will fail, or all the centralized companies will fail at some point in history. We had last week, I think, this huge headlines that almost 2 billion data points were leaked on the darknet and uploaded afterwards on have been pawned together with the passwords. So I think, from my point of view, if we want to solve digital identities and protect the users, we have to educate them. We have to make sure that the user experience is very easy, it should like feel logging in on Google or using Google because it's cozy. And that means the technology has to become invisible because, to be honest, who knows how a smartphone is working or a bank transaction or what is happening in the background. So from that point of view.
No, that's a good point. We're on to our last sort of 4 minutes here, and to kind of underline the point of this conversation, the idea of a roadmap looking into the future. In 2017, I know we were talking a lot about this idea as well, and it's 8 years later. I'm not sure where we are exactly. There are certainly more solutions that exist, but I wouldn't say the market has coalesced around a single or even a handful. What can we expect maybe the next 5 to 7 years? And I'd like to start from you, Bobby.
So I think, first, I think we've actually made a tremendous amount of progress because there are lots of solutions out there in the market that exist that are being used by users every day and that prove themselves to be reasonable products that can subsist in the marketplace. So I think that part is really important. But I think that actually the Web 2 companies are doing a bit of our job for us, which is nice. Because I think one of the shifts that's very important to keep in mind is a generational shift. So, I'm a middle-aged guy. I gave away my privacy 20 years ago, and I have no expectation of privacy at all. But for people who are in their 20s and 30s or younger, they have a very strong expectation of privacy because they actually are much more savvy in their online behavior, and they really understand how they're being monetized, sometimes against their will, by these companies. And so I think that this is a generational change that's happening where, it's like if you look at who gets scammed online, it's primarily older people, of which I fit in that demographic. So, fair game. And so I think that we're seeing a generational shift where consumers will actually vote also with their feet for products that can protect their privacy and protect their own personal information, just because they've been raised in this environment where they are fearful because they understand the risks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thomas?
I mean, one thing we haven't spoken about is AI.
Yeah, that's true.
And the reality is we need to find a verifiable way to delegate authority down to AI agents. And this is something that decentralized identity is truly fit for solving. Outside of that, this concept, there's some low-hanging fruit like usernames and passwords. So we can eliminate the need for usernames and passwords, and we can have passwordless authentication. That reduces a significant attack vector. It also creates a much better user experience if we're going to go back to the user-centric approach. But at a bigger picture here, perhaps, this is an opportunity for governments to rebuild trust in their citizenry, to mandate laws and technological decisions that actually reinforce the rights and the privacy options for citizens. We're living in an environment now where our digital trust is eroding every day, and there's an opportunity here to flip the script and to create a much more positive outlook in a digital realm and future. But we do need to come together. This isn't going to be one magic solution or silver bullet, as you said. We do need to come together and align on what our values are, what is important.
Yeah.
Is it security? Is it privacy? Is it interoperability? Is it how much money we can make?
I think that's a nice point to move down the line. Patricia,
Sure.
please, in terms of what should we expect in maybe the next 5 to 7 years?
If we plot, as the title says, if we plot correctly our roadmap for 2030, I think that by the end we will be able to own our own data, to own our own identifiers and not being renting anymore. So we are on the right path, and I think that if we continue as such, we will arrive there.
Nice. Albert?
Yeah, I think if we can achieve that, cyber criminals or cyber attacks will immediately decrease.
Okay. All right. Well, we have about 20 seconds left. I suppose that's sufficient. I think we covered a lot of our bases. Perhaps next time we'll touch on AI,
Yeah.
but that's a whole other can of worms. Thank you guys for joining us, and thank you for listening into this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.